Good morning from Dragonchain. It's 5 a.m. and I'm going to walk you through how to build a Dragonchain on an L1. So we're going to test my abilities to think at this time in the morning. I've got my cup of coffee here in Seattle and we are going to get started. Speaking of coffee, if you haven't checked it out, Dragonchain's been working with Knowledge Perk in a coffee app, and so one of the things that we do is we can track coffee and the production of coffee on chain. So it's a nice use case of Dragonchain in production. So let's go ahead and get started. To get started on Dragonchain, you can look at our GitHub. It's github.com/Dragonchain. And there's a couple of different repositories within the Dragonchain GitHub. There's the Dragonchain itself, which is the core code, which is our open source Dragonchain repository. And in this document, you can see a number of quick links. Getting started with Dragonchain. Getting started with Dragonchain talks about some of the architectural components, the CLI tools, the SDK tools, how to create transaction types, searching transaction types, and those types of things. We have our project documentation. So the project documentation covers components like the source code, architectural goals, each of the different components, the web servers, the transaction processor, the broadcast processor, the contract invoker, all of the different components of which we have within Dragonchain. Additionally, if you keep going through here, there's a number of SDKs. There's the Dragonchain Node SDK, the Python SDK, the Go SDK, along with a set of directions on how to install it. You can see that there's some nice little packages for each of these SDKs. There's just an npm install, save, Dragonchain-SDK to install the Node SDK. You can do Python -m pip install -u Dragonchain-SDK to install it on the Python, and then Go is go get, and then the Dragonchain SDK go. So it's pretty simple. We'll walk you through some of these installations today, and we'll walk through building a Dragonchain. So if we go back to this documentations guide, we can see a number of different steps. So let's go ahead and get started. If we look back at the Dragonchain site, one of the things that we'll need to do is create a L1 node. Now there's two different ways that we can create an L1 node. One is using the Dragonchain fully managed service, which you can get there by going to dragonchain.com and clicking on sign up for console. So we can go ahead and take a look at that, and you can go ahead and log in through your Dragonchain account here. So you sign up, and I already have an account, so I'll go ahead and just log in. And this is what the console looks like. You can see a number of different chains that I have here. You can see the DragonNet pool nodes that I have, and anything that I need to do for within the console itself. This may be similar to any of the other cloud consoles that you're working, whether it's Azure, AWS, etc. It should seem fairly familiar to you. To create a L1 node, it's as simple as going to this create business node. Now these business nodes are private L1 nodes. This is where your general ledgering, your transactions are stored, your private data is stored here. This is also where the smart contracts are stored, and the business logic for the smart contracts are stored. So None of that business logic is shared with the external world unless you explicitly share that information. So let's go ahead and click on Create Business Node, and it's going to give me a couple of different options. It's going to let me pay with dragons. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to update this, and if I wanted to, I could choose to enable this to do a pay with card. If you need to get some sample coupons, reach out to us at sales@dragonchain.com, and we can build some new coupon codes for you and get you started on Dragonchain. And we can set you up with some example account, some test accounts. So let's go ahead and go to the Create Business node. So I'm going to go ahead and pay with Dragons. You can always pay with at a monthly cost of $99 for a month. That includes $10 of credit for transactions. Gets you access to our smart contract library. You can create custom contracts. You get unlimited transaction types. So transaction types are kind of like a tag, or a type of almost like a table within a database. It kind of specifies the type of transactions to that you can clarify on the actual type of transactions. We'll let you have unlimited API keys, and we have interchains to Bitcoin, Ethereum Classic, and we've actually added since this UI was written, we've actually added in Binance, so that's another one, BTC, to tie in the transactions. So I already have a chain, so if you wanted to create a chain, you would just come in here and create a chain name. I would say like my chain, agree to the terms, and create the business node. And it would create an account. Now I already have some chains, so I have my chain right here, which is a managed chain. It takes about 10 minutes to spin up your first chain before you can actually interact with it. But when you create a chain, it gives you back a set of API keys. I'm going to go ahead and generate my own API keys for this. This one I'm going to just call it 24 hours. To symbolize our load test that we have going on for Dragonchain. And what it does is it produces a set of API keys. Now, you want to protect these API keys. You don't want to share them out to the world like I'm doing in this webcast, because other people could use those API keys to access the solutions. I'll go ahead and delete these API keys after this broadcast. But it will give you back a set of authorization keys, chain IDs, and an API endpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and just download this. It'll create it into 24hours.txt to show my solution. And then let's go ahead and close this down. And then once I have all that information, I'm ready to go configure my keys. Now, the first thing I want to do is set up a command line tool called DCTL. So DCTL is available in the Dragonchain GitHub. And it is, let's go ahead and just look this one up, DCTL. It's right here. And you can see a set of directions on the install in the README. Let's just go ahead and actually, oh, here it is for the installs. So it's an npm. So you're going to need npm. You're going to need Node on your box. So if you don't have Node, you can get Node at Node.js or nodejs.org, and download the latest stable version. So let's go ahead and open up a command prompt. You can do this on a Mac, you can do this on Windows, you can do this on Linux. We use JavaScript for the JavaScript SDK for the command line tool. So it works across multiple different platforms. Occasionally on Windows you need to escape the quotes, and so there's some escaping that you need to do with the quotes, and that's based off of the different shells that you use. So you'll have to be familiar with your shells, whether you're using Bash or Z or PowerShell or even just a command prompt, and the different nuances between each of the different shells. So let's go ahead and install DCTL. So it's as simple as doing npm install -g DCTL. And it will go ahead and pull the package and install it. So now if I type DCTL, I can type DCTL -v -v, and it'll give me my version of 5.3.0 of my DCTL. I can type DCTL, and it will give me a list of different commands. Now, what I'm going to do is do a DCTL, and I may already have a config file on this box. Let's take a look. DCTL status, and I do have a chain on here. The chain on here that I'm using, that I'm connected to right now, is and it starts with 21UX. So if I look at the console of the chain that I'm trying to set up, my chain, it is DJFP. So these are different chains. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is load my API keys, the ones that I just downloaded, this 24hours.txt file, into my DCTL tool. So to do that, if I do DCTL, I can see that there's a set of different commands in here. There's a command called creds, or K for creds, and I can type DCTL creds -h minus DCTL -k, okay. DCTL -k, and what I'm going to do is do K, K -h for help, and then I can do DCTL options is DCTL local, add, and it's going to ask me for my endpoint. And so to do that, I'm going to grab this endpoint here. Enter, use my HMAC key ID, which is the shorter number, my HMAC key, which is my auth key, that varies from implementation to implementation, what it's called. See, like in here, we have it called the HMAC key. In our config, it's called the auth key. I forgot to enter the actual chain ID when I did the add. So what I'm going to do is come up here and copy the chain ID, which is the DJ chain ID here, and go back down and paste that in the DCTL-K local add command. I'll go ahead and hit enter there, and we'll go back through, hit the endpoint, which is the API HTTPS through the Dragonchain.com address. We'll go ahead and hit enter the HMAC key ID, which is the shorter one. Do that, and we'll go ahead and do the auth key. Copy that, paste that in there. And so now you can see that it's been written to, in my case, the C drive. Users, Daniel Ludke, apps local Dragonchain's credential file. It's just a text file that sits there. The location varies based off of Unix and Mac and Windows, but it'll display the output in each of those different locals. So it's like basically your home directory .dragonchain, I think, on a Linux box. You can find that there. So let's go ahead and check out the status. So if I do, remember before I did DCTL, I had the status of a different chain on there. So I can go ahead and do DCTL status and take a look. And now I can see that the chain ID that I'm on is the DJ chain, which is the same chain that's the DJ chain here. So now I know that I'm properly connected into that chain. Now, before I can actually ledger onto my chain, I need to create a transaction type. Now, this chain already existed, so let me take a look to see what type of transaction types I have. So to do that, I'm going to type the DCTL, and in DCTL, there's a number of different commands. There's a command for transaction types, or TT, DCTL TT, and under DCTL TT, I can go ahead and do a DCTL TT get, which will, LS, which will list all of my different transactions types that are on my chain. So in this case, I can see that I have two different transaction types. I have donuts and I have weather on this chain. I'm going to go ahead and create a new transaction type. So let's go ahead and do transaction type. And remember, under transaction type, I can do a create, and I'll go ahead and do -H for help. And I can see here that to create a new transaction type, I'm going to name the transaction type. And so in this case, let's go ahead and just call it banana. And I can create custom indexes. Custom indexes allow me to search these fields. So by default, you can't really search the payloads within the solutions, but this allows us to use Redis search to index the transaction types, which gives us a much more like database type of functionality. It's interesting. If you haven't already seen it, check out our demo on like integrating with a pub sub on Postgres, which is our Postgres extension. It allows us just to connect in those data feeds. There's some interesting things that you can do between like using Redis as a search engine on our blockchain, on Dragonchain as a component, and being able to do kind of queries and Redis search type functionalities on your queries within the ledger itself, and then also the ability to tie that in. And so those index tags are nice to be able to do those searches. So again, if you want to see some information on the indexing, there's some docs right here under the node Dragonchain for the custom text field adoptions there. So in this case, let's go ahead and create the transaction type banana. And so it returns back a JSON response code to me with a status of 200. Successful is true, and that the response was okay is true. And so let's go ahead and do a transaction type ls to make sure that it was created. I can see that I have a transaction type of banana. Didn't create any custom indexes. There's no contract ID, and you can see the block that it was active since. That was like the first block or the genesis block of that transaction type. And so if I go to the DCTL tool, I can go ahead and go DCTL, and I can do a DCTL transaction. And what I can do with a DCL T for transaction, It lets me do a number of different things. I can do create, which creates a transaction. I have the ability to do a bulk transaction, which allows me to create multiple different transactions within a single request. It lets me do a get to get a single transaction by an ID. I can do a query, which allows me to do like kind of a Redis type query or a quick search on the transaction type, and I can get a proof report for each of the different transactions. So let's go ahead and create a transaction. So to create a transaction, I can go ahead and do a DCTL transaction create, and if I do a -H, it'll give me some help. I can do a transaction type, so it's going to want to give me a transaction type, and I create a banana. And so now I have transaction types, and I can create a payload. So the payload would be as simple as I could do a raw, so like just even hello world, and it'll just record that, or it could be a JSON payload, and it will parse it. So let's go ahead and just do it like this. Just do a raw. We'll do JSON next time. And so now it has it reminds me that I can parse the JSON, so it's sending raw instead, and so it says it's stats to 200, and I get a transaction ID returned. So remember, I'm going to go ahead and copy this transaction ID. And remember when I said there's a transaction, there's a number of different commands we can do. Let's go ahead and do a get. Under get, we can do a transaction get with that transaction ID that was returned, and it will what's going on? Transaction get. Oh, I probably need to do transaction type. Oh, transaction get, that's why. Transaction get space. There we go. And I get a status of 200, a response code, a version. You can see the transaction type is banana, all the information. I get a little timestamp. You can see what I tagged it with, the payload right there of hello. And you can see the full proof, the strip proof. And so let's go ahead and do this, the eternal report. The eternal report, which is a proof report for the transaction. So if I do a DCTL T-E, and it will ask me for a transaction ID. So I'll go ahead and do the transaction ID. And what it goes through and does is it shows me all of the proof report for the transactions. So let's take a look at what it returns. So it has the transaction, all of the raw payload here, and then you can see the L1 block itself. You can see that it was a Dragonchain block L1. It's at rest. You can see all the header information in there, the L1, the timestamp, all of the information in the transaction information, the proof that it was passed through, and then the L2 information. So you can see here we have your L2s. You can see the block ID that it happened on the L2, the timestamps, the previous proof on that L2, because Dragonchain built a blockchain of blockchains for each of these Dragon nets. And so as we pass this through, we can see all the strip proof and all of that. So let's keep going. You see additional L2s. So here's another L2 block, and here's another L2 block. So in this case, we have 3 L2 blocks. And so we can see that we have count of 3. we can see that it actually happened in the on-premises AWS use cases for the authorizations. We can see the verifications on the on this at the L4s, and you can see the proof reports, the L3 proof reports tied to the L4s. And then we're still waiting on the L5 verifications for this particular piece. So let's just see if it came through. No, it didn't come through yet, but we'll check it a little bit later to see if we got that L5 verification to come through. So in this case, let's go ahead and do a DCTL transaction query, just to show you what a query can look like. So you'll need to do a transaction type, which is a banana in this case. And it'll ask for what my Redis search query is. In this case, I'm just going to do a star. If you're, so this will return all my queries that are under banana. So that's just that one. And so that's all there is to creating your first transaction using a command line tool. Now, there's also a REST API. If you didn't want to use the DCTL tool, you can always go to the Dragonchain, JavaScript documentation, and on here there is a full outline of our JavaScript SDK, and you can see all of the different APIs and what we expect to see for the different requests and the validations and how to create transactions, all using a REST API. It gives you a lot of flexibility on how you want to build your solution. Now, the other thing that we can do is, now that I have DCTL, I've loaded the keys on my local box, I can use the Python SDK or the Node SDK, and I can actually use those to connect into my Dragonchain. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go to a project folder on my box. So let's go ahead and go to CD. I have them all in here, and we'll just go make directory. We'll call it 24 hours CD 24 hours, and let's just go ahead and do code. Let's just do code index.js. Do I do JS? Do Python? JS? I don't know. Let's do Java. All right, let's do Java. Code index.javascript. And so now I've created my index here. I need to install my my Dragonchain SDK. So to do that, we'll go back, and it's as simple as going through and doing npm I Dragonchain SDK tac save. So I'll just show you what that looks like. npm I SDK -- save, and it went through and installed the packages. So now if I wanted to, I can go ahead and initialize the client. So let's go ahead and just take something simple like this code that's in here, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that into my Visual Studio code, VS Code, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it there. Now that Dragonchain ID that I pasted will need to be updated, so let's go ahead and grab the chain ID that I'm actually wanting, which is this chain. And it's going to grab my code already from, it's going to grab my credentials already from the DCTL when I loaded my credentials there, so I probably won't need to do anything there. And then let's go ahead and grab, let's just get a, let's find something a little bit more interesting. We can do, we'll just grab this. There we go, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal. Oops. Switch over, and we're going to go ahead and move over to the source directory, the 24-hour directory, and we have this index.js. I'll go ahead and do node index.js, and I got something went wrong. I got a status code of 404 from the object. What happened there? Let's see. Assistant main async, calling the client, wait for the Dragonchain SDK to import the Dragonchain SDK required consistent get block. Where is it getting that block? Let's call it just a normal block. Call that block bit. Successful call. Oh, but I'm not getting the response. Okay, that's because I'm not printing the response. So if I looked at the actual output, block object. It's okay, console on. Call dot response, object. Take a look at that. So it's returning a response, but it's not responding the call response to my screen. It's just returning an object to object in this case. I'm gonna. It's a little early in the morning. I'm gonna skip the resolution of figuring out what I have going there. But I'll show you a little bit on the smart contracts on how to push a smart contract through using the DCTL tool. So let's go ahead and go to DCTL, And in here, if I do a DCTL, I can see that there's a command for DCTL contract. And in here, there's a number of different commands for contract. So a smart contract is like code that executes on-chain. It's a deterministic code that allows you to determine what code was executed when and the conditions that caused that code to be executed. So it allows you to kind of have a ability to replay the events that cause something to create those pieces. The other interesting thing is like smart contracts are persistent and they're always like kind of available. So it's always persistent state of a system service that's always available. And all the conditions need to be met for the smart contract to execute. In Dragonchain's world, we built our smart contract engine on top of Docker. And so, or it's actually built on top of OpenFOSS, which uses Docker images and runs Docker images as smart contracts in our environment. So we have a protected environment where we can run the smart contracts and then the regular chain. And so there are two separate environments in where they execute. And so we're able to create these smart contracts using Docker images. And so you can use virtually any language as long as it can be put into a Docker container. For example, we have a number of different templates already. So what I'll do is I'll do a DCTL contract init. And it says right to the test directory. I'll go ahead and say yes. And so now what I told me I didn't do is I didn't use my language, or tac language on my thing. So let's take a look at that. And so like in this case, I can do it init minus, and so let's go ahead and do L, and we'll go ahead and do, in this case, let's just do a Python. Okay, so it's telling me my test heap already exists. So F client. So then we have our node modules in here. So if I went in and did took a look at what the directories were in here. I have this node modules, and then I can actually see my main test for my Dragonchain. So let's see. We have browser chain. What did I do here? Let's start this up. Let's pull up those. Oops. Okay, so let's blow those ones away, and let's try this one more time with the DCTL contract. Under contract, we can go ahead and do contract init, contract init, and minus L, and we'll go ahead and do Python there, and it allows me if I want to create it into the current directory, and now it created it properly. And so now if I come into source, I can see that I have the index.python file here, and this is my smart contract. So in Dragonchain world, smart contract is as simple as standard in and standard out for the information into the smart contract. So in this case, we're just taking a set of get standard in. We read the standard in on the line. We buffer it, add it to the line, break, and then return the buffer itself, and then return it out to the standard out to write it as a standard out, right? And so what we do is we take that transaction type that's sent, and then we send it into the standard in, process it through the smart contract, and take that standard out and return that as the response for the standard out. And you can take that standard in, standard out to tie multiple different smart contracts together to really kind of decompose your application into different components. So let's go ahead and just take this basic logic, and if I wanted to test out this contract, I could do contract. This is on-box testing, where we actually take the Dragonchain code, execute the contract, and test out the contract. We're the only ones, I think, that don't require you to use like a test net, like a Raspin net or something like that, to be able to test a smart contract. Our smart contracts can also be updated too. You'll see that there's also updated the existing contract, right? So that's a very important piece of Dragonchain, is their ability to update contracts. Because your chains are private, you're able to keep the revisions or your data, and so you can update those contracts and revise them over a period of time, over and manage it the way that you'd expect to be able to manage code in general. You just get deterministic and proof over how that data is being written to the chain. So let's look at this. We have DCTL contract. We have DCTL contract, and let's go ahead and take a look at contract, and we'll go ahead and do contract test. Contract test minus H. And then so what it will ask me to do is take the Docker image that I want to use, which, so like in this case, I need to go through and do a Docker build for that, for the index that I just built. So in this case, what I'll do is do a Docker. We'll go into the actual source of the code. We'll do a Docker build. And so if you looked at Docker build, it's going to ask for Docker build and a set of options. So I'm going to give it a -t, give it a tag of .dragon 24. Docker build, Docker build -t, -t for tag, Docker build, period for path, but then I need to give it an image name. So my image name is going to be Docker build. So in this case, I'm just going to call it banana contract. Or, let's call it fruit contract. I'll just call it like that. I think I need to call it .dragon because I can push it up to Docker Hub to So now I have Docker built the doc, and we can see the Docker file in there. So now let's go ahead and do DCTL contract. So we have DCTL contract, and we'll go ahead and do contract and test. Under contract test, go ahead and do -d and give it a payload of hello. Test, what did I miss? DCTL contract test. Look at test directory tag help. Test. Let's call this thing fruit Docker build -t fruit. This thing latest, and we'll just call it doc. There we go. Okay, so that went through and built. We'll do DCTL contract test. We'll give it an image, which is fruit tag latest. And give us some options. P of hello, and let's do this same default one, and so it's telling me that there's no folder config test.js source. So what it's telling me is I need to go -d, and my test directory is C drive source 24hour/test. There we go. And so now I can see whether it ran or not. So it looks like it ran successfully. Let's see. No such file, sorry. No such file. DCTL contract. contract create. Create transaction type is banana, and the image is fruit latest, and then the command is going to be this was a Python index.py, and transaction type conflict. Oh, so it's telling me that I already have a transaction type called banana, and so yeah, it shouldn't allow me to create banana on top of another transaction type of banana. So in this case, I'm gonna have to call it apple, and now it went through and allowed me to create my contract on there. Now, when I first post my contract up, it's going to have pending as the contract state, and then eventually it moves to an active state. So now if I do a contract get and the actual ID, oops. Get, and there's contract ID here. It will show me that it's actually in an error state, so it hasn't done a Docker pull because I wasn't able to. I skipped a step. I didn't push my image up to the Docker hub. So this is good. This is live TV, so it reminds you of what happens when you build at 6 a.m. 5 a.m. Yeah, it's 6 a.m. now.
Cool.
So I'll go ahead and do a Docker push. So what you need to do is create a Docker hub. So if I go to Docker Hub is a repository for your Docker images. So let's go ahead and open up Docker Hub. I'll go ahead and sign in. Sending me a thing. I'm gonna go ahead and pause my Docker image while I check my mail. How are we doing on the scale test?
Currently, we have 213 million transactions.
213 million transactions.
Since January 7th, 9 a.m.
Since 9 a.m. yesterday, so we're doing pretty good there. Where's my Hangouts? Okay, so now that I'm logged into my Docker hub, I can go ahead and create a repository. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a repository. I'm just going to call this one, we'll call this one, so this one's called Dragon Dan. I'll call this one, we're going to call this one Apple again. And we'll make it public. We can make it private, but then we have to do we have to do something for the password on there. It's in the docs on how to use the private pieces, but let's go ahead and create this Apple repository. And so now we can see Docker push, and if I want to do however I want to push my images, so let's go ahead and do from here, go ahead and do Docker, oops, Docker push Dragon Dan / Apple tag name. We'll just call this one V1 for the tag. Oh, the Dragon Dan Apple doesn't exist because I built it under .dragon, I think. So we could go through, go Docker build, and the image name is going to be Dragon Dan / Apple, and just the directory that we're in. Docker. Minus T, sorry, and space dot. This builds us with the Dragonchain with the tags. So now if I go through, I can do the Docker push. We'll Docker push Dragon Dan / Apple with the V1 tag. And tag does not exist. Alright, there we go. So we pushed all of the smart contract to Docker Hub. So now what I can do is using the DCTL tool, contract, create app. So if I did contract create minus help, it's going to tell me that I need to do my transaction type. So let's call it an Apple. And then it's going to tell me I need to have my image. So my image that I'm going to run is Dragon Dan / Apple, and the let's just take a look at what I have here. And what I have is one called latest. And let's go ahead and do contract create Dragonchain latest. And I need a command, so I'm going to run Python as my command to run, and then the file is index.py, and then create Dragonchain Apple latest Python. That's correct. And type conflict, so there's already one called Apple on there, so let's call this one basket, their store, instead of all that. So now, okay. So I was able to create a on the chain, and it's pending right now. So let's go ahead and take a look. If I do contract ls, it'll list out all of my contracts on here. My Apple one, remember when we posted it, it had a pool error. That's why I didn't post just now. But now I can see that the store one I just created actually got created properly, and I can now execute it. So if I wanted to execute it, so I can go ahead and type dctl transaction create, and I can go ahead and do a transaction create, and I'll give it a transaction type of store, and I'll give it a payload of hello, just to do my thing. And so now you can see that it sent the transaction through, and so now what I want to do is do a dctl, and under dctl there's actually a command called transaction query, and under transaction query I'm just going to go star transaction type, we'll call it store, and we'll just call it star, and now we can see all of the transaction types that occurred on here. So I can see the raw response that happened out of my invoked, the contract that invoked it is the same contract that that was written to. I can see the raw response of hello from Python, which is the output, the std standard out of my contract, and I can see here the transaction that was written to chain that invoked the actual contract. So you can see here, this is the contract, this is the transaction I created with the payload of hello, which was written to chain, and then the smart contract took the invoker and took that transaction, that payload, and passed this payload from my transaction and passed it into the standard in of my store contract, and then this is the standard out hello from Python 3 of my contract. And so that's all there is to creating a smart contract on Dragonchain. Now if I went back to the console, I could take a look at my smart contracts, and I could see that I have a store contract on here, and information about it, the actual invocation, the commands and arguments on it. There's actually some interesting things where I can take a look at my logs, so I can see what was going on those pieces. Additionally, on this contract, if I want, or in the console, I can take a look at different things like the transaction types that I've created. I can also look at in the contracts, we have a bunch of smart contract libraries. So we have a currency contract, and this currency contract, we can create a set of tokens on a chain. In this case, we'll just call it test, no interval, it'll just be a one-time thing. I can call it my test. I want to create 100 of these. I want one decimal, maybe let's do 8 decimals of precision for this, and then I can give it a wallet address to create the contract, and then create the contract. And so that would mint up a series of tokens on Dragonchain, and allow you to use them in a fungible tokens in that case. And we'd also be able to do some other type of token properties on chain if you wanted to. And so we're able to help you with those. We have professional consulting services that can help develop currency contracts, token contracts, tokenomics in those different areas. Lawrence's consulting practice is extremely experienced in being able to create those types of solutions for customers. We also have interchain watchers. Interchain watchers are basically like a subscriber to a different chain. So like we can watch a different address. So like if we wanted to take a look at this, I'll go ahead and write this contract to my chain and call this just a watcher. And then what you can do here is just choose a normal, like a mainnet on Ethereum, choose an address to watch, or and then you can look at the number of blocks, and then what you see, a transaction, you can post the transaction to it, and invoke some action based off of different behaviors that you see on those addresses. Whether you want to write or read or respond to different types of information that you see. So that's a watcher. We can also publish, so like in this case this is an Ethereum publisher. We can go publish, create my new chain, we'll call this one a pub. Choose the Ethereum, give it a header if you want. And we can go through and post a transaction to these different chains. And so that's all there is to creating external publishers. And those are the power of being able to interchain. You know, be sure to watch the cron job of like where Robbie walks us through taking APIs, taking multiple, watching different APIs, coming to consensus on what the real world state of an item is, like whether it's the weather, whether it's a shipment of an item or a good, or supply chain logistics, taking that information and making business logic decisions on it, and then pushing that out. And it's really simple, using publishers and watchers in Dragonchain to be able to do that type of architecture and be able to ledger that information in a provable manner on chain. What else can we do on this? We can also query for different blocks. So if we go back to DCTL, we saw the status, we saw transactions, transaction types, we have contracts, and now we actually have blocks. So let's take a look at the blocks, DCTL blocks, and I can do a block. And remember that block I sent up here for this transaction? Let's just get this one block this is from the smart contract. Get block. And so if I do a DCTL block, I'm going to actually have to do a get block. So this will get me back my information on my block. I can do a block query verification. Verification is actually get block. Oh, block verification get, and then the actual block number. And then now I can see these are all the verifications from the other nodes. So here's my L2 response. Here's an L2 response. Here's an L2 response. Here's an L3 response. That's an L4 response. And in this case, I don't have an L5 response back yet. So, but that's how you get a proof response of being able to see what your transaction looks like. Let's see, what else can I show you, which is kind of interesting. We have a new Flutter SDK out. So let's, if you install Flutter, let's just say you install Flutter, you can go Flutter, start a new project. We'll go ahead and switch over and start a new Flutter project, we'll call this one,
Do you want to break and do an update and then go to that, or?
test. Yeah, let's go ahead and do a update.
Because we had, I think at 6 was the